For today, I am joined by my husband, Sean, and we will be doing a spoiler discussion for Frankenstein. And this was both of our first times reading this book. So, Sean, we'll start with just general thoughts. What did you think of Frankenstein?
I liked Frankenstein. I don't know if it was what I expected or not. I mean, I knew it was an older book, but I kept saying like I didn't even know this was a story. I guess I knew there was a guy named Frankenstein who had a monster. I knew nothing beyond that, and so it was very refreshing.
We at least knew that Frankenstein wasn't the monster itself. That's probably the
Yes,
only
yeah.
thing that we knew. But yeah, both
Yeah.
of us didn't know the story whatsoever. We should make known that from what we can tell, and Sean, you have the copy there, I don't believe we're reading the 1818 version. I think this was the updated text. If that changes anybody's feelings about which one we picked up or if they end up having anything to
It's
chime
like
in
I'm
with.
turning this off.
I also quite liked it. I think that there is sometimes this view that the classics are going to be very daunting and nearly impossible to understand, and I didn't think that was true at all. And I want to note, Sean, you typically read a lot more books that I think are adjacent in writing style and tone and maybe how they approach themes, whereas I think I read things that more genre and it's in their genres are closer. So maybe I've seen things that are more directly influenced through the creativity of this and how they use these abstract concepts and almost like mythological things, because in a lot of ways this felt like a mythology retelling or a biblical retelling, depending on how you look at it. It felt like a lot of that, which you see in science fiction, fantasy, and speculative in general, but you read a lot of things that I think have closer parallels to how they approach thematically. Are there some that you can think of as examples that you've read or things that you just kind of picked up on right away?
I like a lot of 20th century literature, and this is 19th century, so I think a little different in terms of I actually think this book is maybe a little bit more obvious in some of its thematic material, which isn't a bad thing. I like being knocked over the head with themes, but I think sometimes like there are other works that kind of like they toy with you a little bit. They make you work a little harder. I don't think this one made you work super hard for what it was saying. So
What do you think it was saying?
well, I think like so our copy, oddly enough, doesn't have the subtitle, but the subtitle is The Modern Prometheus, which, you know, it's Prometheus is like the myth where Prometheus was, I think, a titan. I don't think he was a god actually. But I think in some myths he creates humanity and he at least like brings like fire to humanity. He's kind of seen as like a person bringing technology, I guess almost like civilization to humanity, and that he's punished by Zeus for that in a rather graphic means. Frankenstein is it's like, you know, the Jurassic Park, like, you know, they never stop to ask whether they should type of thing. Like he's the new Prometheus. He's making his own man, and then he realizes the consequences of that. I think just kind of obviously this is not talking about this. This is very, very different. But it made me also think of the book Oppenheimer movies based off of is called American Prometheus. So, you know, again, this kind of like this idea of technology going too far, or what have I done? What have I unleashed upon the world? That one, I was like, I think I get that one. It's in the subtitle, so feeling pretty good about that.
Yeah, I didn't know it was in the subtitle, but I can see that. And I think it's something notable is that not only were neither of us aware of the story ahead of time, but we didn't really want to look at any analysis ahead of time. We just kind of wanted to see, as modern readers, kind of what we got out of it and our views. And you were, I mean, they've actually just say Paradise Lost a couple of times in it, but you had noticed a couple of times before they directly state it some parallels to Paradise Lost. What were the things that you noticed with that?
Like you said, there's a part where uh the creature or the demon or the monster, whatever you want to call him, like one of the things he reads is Paradise Lost. There's a couple different angles. I think and I think I put this in there too. Like I think the creature thinks of himself as like the new Adam, which I think is really interesting. Like because that puts Frankenstein in the role of God, and there is this sort of like, you don't love me enough. I was rejected by my God. You could also look at it though as like the creature is Lucifer, because in Paradise Lost, uh, the beginning of the story is Lucifer and the other demons rebelling against God, the other angels. I mean, I guess they're not demons yet. They're rebelling against God. So he does rebel. I mean, and I can't remember. I haven't read Paradise Lost, so I can't remember if Lucifer. I don't think it's a rebellion of like, you don't love me enough. I don't think it's that, but I do think a lot of the things people talk about when they talk about Paradise Lost is God comes off kind of not great. Like, and Lucifer's kind of charismatic. Like, there's this kind of weird thing where God is like this distant thing, and Lucifer is just like, he seems all right. so I, uh, so I think like, the creature does some bad things. I mean, and we'll talk about, I guess, more story stuff later. He does do bad things, so I don't want to be like the creature's just so innocent, but he is rejected. I mean, like he's rejected by his creator. Um. Anyways, so but there again, you can look at it from maybe Frankenstein as the Lucifer, because he's trying to be his own. He wants to godhood in a way. So it's there's a lot of different kind of ways you can look at it. Oh, that's a good question. I'll let you
Yeah, I
grab that.
think for well, you were saying that obviously the monster isn't really necessarily pure entirely, but he also starts out pretty pure in a lot of ways. I mean, he was just kind of happy to meet his creator essentially when he first comes in, and then Victor just leaves, which I was like, wait, you're not even gonna go back? He just completely abandons this thing that he created, which I think going back to, is it, like religious or anti-religious themes and commentary, this idea of, I mean, there's different views, of course, when it comes to how much involvement God has in the common man's life. So I think if you approach it from the idea that God kind of made mankind and then let them loose, there is that feeling of you created us and then you didn't provide, additional things, which isn't, again, this isn't an idea of this is what we feel. This is kind of the idea that possibly is present. And if you kind of view Victor as God, which he even talks about, I think himself oftentimes, not that he wants this, but he realized like, oh, I played God. This approach of like maybe there was a creator, but then everybody was left to their own
Oh
devices,
yeah,
essentially.
deism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you have that view of religion, which I think was at least somewhat present at this time, then there is this kind of frustration with the idea of you created us and then you abandoned us, or you could view it as rejection, which I think you have that very direct as soon as he creates it and then gives it life. He just is not wanting really to be involved with it whatsoever. And so Frankenstein is initially just sort of this pure being that doesn't have any view of things, and the world around him is what fills him with what he ends up becoming ultimately. But he's not only rejected by his creator, but then he's rejected by the family in the cottage, and everybody that happens to see him is horrified by him. I mean, there's the villagers that were cruel to him because he was so
Hmm.
hideous to them, all of that. So I think there is a lot there about the feeling of rejection from a creator. And then also there is maybe a little bit of the question of evil present, like
Yeah.
how could you allow this? Because he even consistently, when he goes on his chapters long monologue when the monster does. He kind of even has this, well, even Lucifer had the demons. I have no
I
one. I
have
have
nobody.
nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of stated a number of times.
Your deism thing I think is really interesting because and I should have made a banner for this. So this is a very romantic, and by that I mean like romanticism work, right? And deism is kind of a post enlightenment, well, I shouldn't say post, kind of enlightenment era thing, like this idea that like God set things in motion, everything's governed by laws, right? When I think of like enlightenment, I think of like Newton. The world is like this kind of mechanical place. I'm trying to think, which philosopher was it that like thought animals were basically robots? I can't think of who that is. But anyways, basically the world is like this mechanical thing. Like God wound up a clock and then just was like, okay, bye. Which that was even like thought of like Thomas Paine thought that, like a lot of, 18th century people thought that. And romanticism is kind of a rejection of that. Like it's kind of a return to nature. It's a return to mystery. We don't understand everything. There's beauty, there's goodness, there's evil. There's a much more like this mechanistic idea is wrong. This thing that you guys said is wrong. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't think I'd thought of it in terms of deism necessarily, but deism, I do think she is rejecting that idea. And I think as like I said, a romantic era book, I think it's rejecting a lot of that kind of mechanistic thinking.
Both of us, just for anybody that ends up watching this or if you're watching it live, both Sean and I made our little banners and we pretty much avoided talking about the book ahead of time. So some of these banners were the ones I made and some of these are Sean's. So we were kind of naturally bouncing between each other's ideas because I think that speaks to some of the more overt things possibly that the story was saying, that we both came up with some of it. But I did have, what do you think nature represents in the story? Because oftentimes they'll be going on and on and on about, oh, the plight of my situation. I'm so sad. And then I stopped and I gazed upon this field of flowers and I felt so much better. So I was curious if you felt like there was more to what you thought that the nature was representing in the story. Do you think it's just sort of what you were talking about in the romantic era feeling, or do you think that it's also saying something in addition to that?
There's a part where Frankenstein is just out in the mountains, just having a good time, and like he's been so stressed and freaking out, and his I think at this point his little brother has died, and the woman who was blamed for it has been killed, and he's just out in nature, and he says he feels more solemn and like this awe-inspiring thing of the mountains and nature, and it kind of soothes him, and I don't know, I just feel like that kind of goes into the nature good kind of romantic thing.
And I think it speaks to the hubris of man. I think part of one of the more possibly overt things in the story is when human beings, we were talking about before, when they basically fancy themselves as gods, the modern Prometheus, all of those things are present. And it's almost like if we could just realize that nature all around us creates things that are more magnificent than what we could ever imagine, or they're more peaceful and tranquil, and they are going to fulfill a lot of what we're looking for. Like we're looking for fulfillment in all these other things. And oftentimes when you have this almost return to nature, it feels like coming home. But the book also has a number of things where they talk about the rejection of nature, which is something I will bring up again later in the discussion. The nature could have been a counterpart to the madness that endless pursuit brings. I like that assessment a lot. I will, like I said, I'll bring up the nature thing again, the concept of the rejection of nature, because it's said a couple of times, I believe, in this. But do you feel like maybe it's also speaking to, well, do you think that this is part of it? And then also what I was stating before about how it's basically showing the hubris of man to think anything could compare, basically.
Yeah, I think I like that about the counterpart to the madness that endless pursuit brings. I like that. I did find the quote I was searching for, in my notes, and it's exactly what you're saying. Um, the immense mountains and precipices that overhung me on every side, the sound of the river raging among the rocks, and the dashing of the waterfalls around spoke of a power mighty as omnipotence, and I ceased to fear or to bend before any being less almighty than that which had created and ruled the elements here displayed in their most terrific most terrific guise. Um so yeah, there's like an awe and a whatever made this, if there's something that made this, that's what I'm most impressed by. It is kind of like a I feel like Victor's like, okay, yeah, I made one creature, but I didn't make this.
Is it John Muir? Is that the person who has kind of that similar way of
Mhm.
feeling about nature? Yeah, I think
Also
too. I
probably
actually,
similar time, now that I think
well,
about it. Yeah.
I think what you were saying before matches this well, the idea of there being a certain view, the romanticizing of it and like the rejection of before. And I almost feel like the emphasis on nature captures that really nicely because it's basically saying it's not this mechanical thing, or at least that's probably not what a lot of people want to believe. We would rather believe in this awe that's right in front of us instead of going to a more because there's almost something to the previous concept being almost inherently more centered on man
Mhm.
because of the concept of innovation and such things is more of a mankind thing as opposed to nature, which isn't. I think that could be part of it as well. And the thought of nature being unmatched in the scope of creating is a great one. Yeah, I think Sean, you were just kind of saying that too. Victor being like, I made this one kind of hideous
Yeah.
thing.
So, um, I feel like we're in this very interesting discussion. So, I would be remiss if I didn't shout out Aristotle and slash Thomas Aquinas here. There's a very interesting. It's pretty close to the beginning of the book. It's on page 30 of my copy. Um, so this is so nerdy, but if you are familiar with Aristotle and or Thomas Aquinas, the final cause. So the final cause is like, Thomas Aquinas would say God. Aristotle is kind of just like, I don't know, like whatever. Um, but like there's like first causes would be like motion or gravity, things like these, the laws, right? But there has to be like some sort of final cause, right? The thing that everything goes back to. Anyways, so he says the untaught peasant beheld the elements around him and was acquainted with their practical uses. The most learned philosopher knew little more. He had partially unveiled the face of nature, but her immortal lineaments were still a wonder and a mystery. He might dissect, anatomize, and give names, but not to speak of a final cause. Causes in their secondary and tertiary grades were utterly unknown to him. I'd gaze upon the fortifications and impediments that seemed to keep human beings from entering the citadel of nature, and rashly and ignorantly I had repined. So basically, he's like, yeah, I tried to make this creature thing. It worked. I still don't know anything. It's this very like the mystery of the world and the mystery of the final cause. I don't know. I think it's very interesting, and I think Mary Shelley is way smarter than me. Is what I'm getting at. I was like, oh boy, we're getting into it. So
I also wanted to bring up you had this about nature. The sight of the awful majestic in nature had indeed always the effect of solemnizing the mind and causing me to forget the passing cares of life. I think that's what you were the other
yeah,
one you were
yeah.
talking about before. Yeah. Um I also think there is something to the I give and I take away
Hmm.
within the story too, with how he is making this bride. And I think there's something that what you just said brought to mind where you were saying he created something and he's like, I still don't know anything. It's almost like just I'm gonna try to mimic instead of actually understand. And I think that's part of what the creature is doing too so often is he's just trying to mimic human behavior. And the idea of like, well, now I've decided I must need a bride because that's what
Yes.
humans have. They
Yeah,
have
yeah.
this partner. And then back to Victor playing God, he And another reason why he feels like the villain too, because he starts to create and then he's like, never mind. And he rips
Yeah.
it apart in front of the monster. And you're like, why? I understand his thought process of, well, she's not beholden to any of these promises. What if she decides to wreak havoc? And it also, I think, is commentary on free will, where Victor couldn't concede. He couldn't give something free will because all he could think about is this idea that what they would do with it could be bad or could negatively affect him. So he didn't want to do that. And I thought that part was really tragic, but also that's why I was so frustrated with Frankenstein, because so often he would come around to a certain idea and then he would change his mind, and then he would come around and then he would change his mind. And it's very, very aggravating if you're the recipient of this back and forth constantly. But I thought that scene was really tragic, and I also didn't know how he could possibly think that that wouldn't enrage the monster
Yeah.
further, or maybe
It,
he did, but then he was like, "It's worth it, though."
that scene took me completely by surprise. I thought he was going to go through with it, and I was like, "Oh, this is weird. Like, what's going to happen from here?" And going back to the Paradise Lost thing, and I think the monster even says it. Like he won his Eve. Like he at least Adam was cast out of the garden, but at least he had his Eve with him. And yeah, Frankenstein was like, no Eve for you. I won't be responsible for the evil unleashed on the world, which is an interesting point. Like you're saying about free will, like there's little, like, are you saying God has responsibility for mankind's evil? I don't know. Maybe Mary Shelley's saying that. Maybe she's not. But it is an interesting question.
I think the other side of it was, especially because you were saying how the monster says at least Adam had Eve, that there is this desire for companionship. So
It's
I
so
don't know,
sad.
maybe it's a modern day. We're all in our houses on our phones, and maybe it's it's me leaning into that and then projecting onto this book a wisdom of the modern day. This idea of go touch some grass and hang out with your friends and love people and talk to people kind of thing. But I don't think that it's just a modern day imposing onto this author our own problems and our seeking of something better, because it's kind of a tale as old as time. It's a thing that I think is present in a lot of works, this idea of look around you. And it's also, this book isn't quite tackling it, but I think this is often also in response to the violence of the past and this desire for always having more. And it's like if you could just have contentment and find peace with your family and your loved ones. So I think that this book, while it's not maybe in response to those sorts of things, I think that this time in which this book was written, you usually are able to assess better these sorts of things and like zoom out. But I think we were starting to see technology, not obviously as we know it now, but it was getting to a point where people's lives are very different than they had looked not that long ago. And there is this possibility of people kind of getting further and further in instead of going out and having these friendships and everything. And it's just this general, we need each other and we need nature. And
Mhm.
that's in a lot of ways where you're going to find peace in life. Do you think that was part of it, especially with the whole idea of rejection and
Yeah.
isolation and how isolation breeds discontent and unhappiness and
Yeah.
then the desire for revenge against others?
Yeah, I do. I think what's really interesting is just kind of cyclical things that seem kind of um I don't know, like you're reading this book from 200 years ago, but you're like, "Oh, this feels like now." Uh I I'd have to like fact check this so someone can do it. But I think we're like kind of starting industrial revolution here, so there's sort of like this um maybe we're modernizing textiles, or we've got water mills, like things like that, where there's almost I don't want to say that we're not quite at like full blown factories, I don't think yet, but this kind of like the world is changing. We're moving from kind of an agrarian thing to this more, you know, large scale production type thing. And I just think it's so interesting because there's this impulsive like, hey, uh, like you said, touch grass. I mean, it's kind of a funny thing, but like get out into nature, you know, get away from like, are we going too far? Like, is it, are we playing God? And I think like right now and maybe always we have this thought. I mean, uh, I think right now we're going through a similar thing where it's like is technology going too far? You know, we're fill in the blank, whatever technology you think is going too far. Um, and there is like this sort of like we need to get out and see people and do things, which is all fine and good. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I just think it's interesting that like we keep having this discussion. Like it seems like the 200-year-old discussion of
I do want
you
to
know.
say I looked up for you, and there's a huge irony in the fact that it's an AI overview of this information. But it did say that the first industrial revolution was 1760 to 1840, brought
Nailed it.
mechanization via water slash steam power and factory system. So yes, you definitely accurately assessed that. And then also they added, let's see, feel like Victor's isolation led him deeper and further into his personal whims. Of course, he had his family, but Henry, sorry, plus Henry early on. But I think I remember the book mentioning his lack of desire to be around people. Haha. Yeah, I think he also kind of waxes on about, oh, I was so happy in my childhood when I wasn't sucked into this lab where I was all alone, and when I was just around my family and these people I love and my friend and all those things. I think he definitely was showing this I lost myself along the way sort of feeling. Oh, go ahead, John.
Oh, I just want to add, I guess, one more thing to what I already said. And I'm basically rephrasing what I said, but I guess what I think is funny is nowadays we idealize, I think, this period. You know, like, wouldn't it be better if we all just lived out in the country and there was like one, you know, steam powered textile factory? You know, like I think we do this thing where uh we romanticize a period and then we're like that was how the way things should have been. And then you go back to that period and they're romanticizing an earlier period and like that's how things should have been. Like this is how people are meant to be. Um I just think it's like I don't know if it's human nature. Maybe, I don't know, but it's something where we're like we're discontent
And
with
also,
things.
there sometimes is a lack of because you see, and this isn't a dismissal of somebody who maybe genuinely finds this to be appealing, but you know, you have like the homestead where like,
Mhm.
oh, we should all just have our own houses in the middle of nowhere and on a plot of land. And
That's
so
basically what they have in Frankenstein. Like these people live
yeah,
on one plot of land and
but
that's it.
the thing I think people often forget is it's like you're romanticizing wealth at a different time. You,
Yeah.
if you were at that time with the level of
True.
wealth you have now, you would be the factory worker who
Yeah.
has no rights and you know is going to probably have a horrible injury or get really sick or something. But I do think that he even he even shows himself to have a level of wealth in his family. Like, oh, all my needs were met, and I was frolicking around in nature and enjoying life. It was only when I went too far that things
Yeah.
were worse. But I do want to kind of slightly switch into another topic. So
I know I could
I
keep going on about this topic forever, so it's probably a good idea.
well, if there's more we want to add, that might
Yeah.
come up too. So I believe I saw this when I was going through and making sure I had all the characters' names correctly. I wanted to note that the author and the recipient of Walton's letters have the same initials. Do
Oh,
you think there's a reason the author? So if this was not something, you know, that you noticed before, then this is something I guess on the spot you'd have to think about. But do you think there's a reason the author made the recipient of the tale the same initials as her own?
I did not notice that. So I've nothing. That's pretty interesting though. Did
Well,
you
we
think there was a connection?
yeah, I so but my question about if there's a connection ties to a more like, whoa, is this even happening view of this
Uh-huh.
book. So
Okay.
throughout the book, a lot of times I kept going, is did he even actually make something? I kept wondering because it just he makes it and then he just dips and then you don't hear about it for so long. And then I thought, is this in his head? Is he going mad? Because when he shows up and he's like, I know it was the monster that killed my brother.
Yeah, so I thought for sure until it did turn out the creature murdered people. I actually thought it was like a lesson on scapegoating or something. I even wrote in my notes. I was like, "Oh, we're scapegoating the monster, are we? Is that what we're doing?" But yeah. Anyways.
Yeah, so I was wondering, I was like, I don't know. I feel like something about all this. I mean, obviously it's a story,
Mhm.
but I was like, it just doesn't feel, did he go mad? Did he imagine it? And then there were signs that it was possibly actually happening based off of some other people then were being harmed by it. Then there's also the question of like, is it actually Victor that's doing it all? Is that why he keeps technically being like, I did this, I did this? Is it like
Yeah.
yeah. And but then going back to the idea of the recipient of the letter being like the author herself, if we imagine that Walton is almost like a stand-in for one of her friends in real life and she is, who she is, then the friend is creating this whole like make believe story to try to convey something he's struggling with.
Hmm.
Because Walton, I asked myself, I was like, did I what exactly was he searching for? I mean, I know it kind of briefly says, but he kind of briefly is like, I'm looking for this, but it's a little vague. And then he's like, I desire companionship. If only I had a friend who was just like me. And then he stumbles upon Victor Frankenstein, who he not only does see himself in, but also seems very attracted to Frankenstein. But then he goes on this whole cautionary tale that supposedly Victor Frankenstein is telling. But then I'm like, is this just him grappling with something he's dealing with and he can't actually just tell his sister how he feels.
Hmm.
He has to make up this tale and then work through it in that way. But then I mean this is getting very like meta
Yeah,
about the
very
story.
meta.
But then
It's very interesting though.
but then at the story, I put, do you think there's something more to the idea that Walton's crew want to go back at the end? And he acquiesces basically after giving like kind of Victor, not Walton, Victor gives this impassioned speech. And then everybody's like, I guess we'll think about it a little more. And they're like, no, we want to go home. So I was like, is this trying to show how even when you do want to pursue something different, that eventually everybody just gets back in line and just goes with what everyone wants? Like he went through this whole tale in his mind of it
Hmm.
was back and forth like philosophical debate of Frankenstein. Like does Victor Frankenstein and Walton, or I should say, does Victor Frankenstein, Henry, and the monster all represent different sides? Is Elizabeth basically like the stand-in for, I guess, his own sister, if that's who he's messaging, writing letters to? It just kind of felt like Walton was working through some stuff. And I know that this was a framing of stories, and this has been a framing of stories of someone telling you a tale. So I recognize that it's not like this was unprecedented, but it just kind of felt like it had a fairy tale quality to it once Victor Frankenstein became the teller of the story. But when Walton was the teller of a story, it just kind of felt like this tender-hearted, very adventurous man who just wants a friend, and it felt more settled. And then the Victor Frankenstein part felt more obviously unreal because of the whole I created this being part, but also just in how it was told. It felt like ethereal in a way. So I don't know if you had any thoughts. This ties into my other theory that I'll bring back, by the way.
Yeah, I hadn't really even considered that what was happening didn't happen, right? I mean, like, I think, like, and by what I mean by that is, like, I also thought at times, I was like, "Is Victor just kinda crazy?" Like, one of those things. And I think I even had the thought that, like, maybe Victor's just pulling his leg in his weird way, you know, like maybe this thing doesn't exist. But I don't think I'd considered that Walton had created it all, but that actually makes some sense because right, the monster is there with Walton at the end, you know, with Walton, you know. Um, so I think that's a really interesting idea. As to what Walton's searching for, I thought it was kind of just a vague, like, I want to be remembered, you know, I want to be a hero, or, you know, like kind of this.
Well, I think he's looking for a way to get through like the North Pole into,
Right. But I guess what I'm
but
saying is
it just feels
like his drive. Again, I keep going back to like romanticism, but it feels like this very um like I want to be important type of thing, or I want to be remembered, or I want to be I don't know, but
I like this. Walton was giving Victor, but as an explorer.
exactly.
So it's been almost 40 minutes. I'm gonna finally bring in the thing that I felt immediately with the book that feeds into this theory that comes back to the rejection against nature thing. So I thought there were a lot of queer undertones to this book. So I think possibly this is a repression of attraction to men in some ways, because if you go back and you read Walton talking about Victor Frankenstein, if you hear when Victor Frankenstein is talking about the professor he liked, who he thought, oh, I like this professor. Now I like the natural sciences again. The way Victor Frankenstein talks about his friend Henry, there are a lot of things that you're like, well, I mean, if they talked about everyone like this, be different. But Victor Frankenstein hardly says anything about Elizabeth, his betrothed. It's like Elizabeth is beautiful, and
He worries about her. I mean, that's
he
about
worries.
the extent of it, I think.
He worries, and he's also like, I think she represents this almost romanticized, to use that word again, view of the perfect woman of their society. And he cares about her. He tells her all the time, like, yes, I love you. I love you very much.
But then he just like leaves, and then he's like super happy when Henry goes with him.
Yes,
You're like, oh,
yes.
okay.
So, but those weren't the only things. I think thematically, I mean, there are some talking about the lustrous eyes that Victor has and the swell of his voice in his ear and things like that, where you're like, this feels a little less than straight. But so there's that. But then there's the deeper things about. I mean, I almost had a whiplash moment where it was initially talking about the monster when Frankenstein is first making him. It says that he was fashioning him to be attractive. And it was only after he gave it the spark of life that suddenly it was this hideous thing, which it felt a little bit like if the monster represents his repressed gay feelings, then when it's just an idea in his mind, then it's something that he is fond of and that he thinks of fondly. But then once he officially brings it into existence, it's like a thing that everyone would look at with horror. Because at this time, couldn't you be executed if you were found to be a man who had a relationship with a man? Is that
I don't know
possibly
English law of 18 whatever, but that I
this
wouldn't be surprised.
so this idea that like, oh, all of society would be horrified, and then Victor himself is rejecting it also, but it's like this part of him because it keeps being almost like this mirror to him. Um, and then the whole idea of the wording of like the rejection of nature being this thing that society has told them is true, that this is a rejection of nature if you have these sorts of feelings and thoughts. And just then the idea of like Walton who comes he comes across the gayest, I think, of all the characters. But Walton having this possible, I'm trying to tell my sister how I feel, I'm trying to work through how I feel, and he kind of has this parable, if you will, where he is working through what would society think of me? What would they say? But then also this sort of, if I don't ever allow for this to exist in any capacity, then I die too. This idea of when Victor dies, the monster dies kind of feeling like there's nothing left. It's almost like I'm not quite fully living either. And I wonder too if the death of the Bride of Frankenstein, I'm calling it the Bride of Frankenstein, sorry. I know that's like a later thing that's not necessarily here, but this Eve type character, him killing her, and then also Elizabeth being killed, it kind of feels like this, but this isn't really how I can't actually go through with this kind of thing. That's a good observation about Henry and Elizabeth. Definitely. You said you met Walton. Definitely Walton's fascination too, especially for someone he kind of just met. That's okay. We knew you met Walton. But there were a number of things in this that I felt like were speaking to it. I don't necessarily think the whole thing is just that. I think all the other things we've been talking about are present in this. Obviously, there's the Prometheus, there is the parallels to Paradise Lost. I think there's a lot of things about nature and God and possibly innovation and the rejection of where things are going and all these things. But I felt like some of that was present too. So I was curious your thoughts. I will say this was the only thing that as I read, I really sent to Sean because Sean read the book first. And then as soon as I started it, I texted Sean. I said, this book's very gay because I was picking up on that, or at least my perception. I was reading or hearing some of that when I was reading it. And then it kind of didn't go away. I thought there were a lot of things. I kept thinking like, oh, I mean, I'm not used to reading books from this time. Maybe that's just how they talked about other men. But then I was like, I mean, he doesn't quite go on so much about Elizabeth and women the same way that we do about the fellas in this. So anyway, I was curious, Sean, your thoughts about all of that.
No, I think it's really interesting. I mean, I think initially I found it kind of funny just because you were sending me, quotes about lustrous eyes and things like that, and it was kind of funny. But hearing you expand upon it, about it being kind of like this maybe exploration of Walton
It's repressed.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, it's one of those things where I'm like, yeah, maybe. Like I think like it's kind of interpretive, if you want to go that route, but I don't think it's wrong. I also think I was just thinking something
Well,
about
while you're trying to remember, I was trying to look up if it was true that you could be killed, and it said it was a capital offense in England until
wow,
1828.
there you go.
So you really couldn't.
Yeah, really couldn't. There is something, I mean, I think you already said this, but the creature wants to be loved by Frankenstein, right? I mean, like, and I guess like I continuously think of it as like this God man relationship, um, but it could be something else. It could, right? I mean, it could be like I've been rejected in a different way, and like you're saying, like I guess I need a woman. Is like
Yeah. I think wording it.
and then it's like, and then that's taken away from him, and it's before he can even experience that, right? I mean, so like I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting thought, but also like totally over my head. Like I did not read it that way at all. I think I was too wrapped up in like I said, the God mankind.
Well, we were talking about how all of the monster's views are fed to him through his reactions to society. It's only when society tells him something or makes him feel a certain way that he realizes. It's almost like when he is talking about, then I gained knowledge and then I realized basically how much the world hated me. And before it was almost for him better to be ignorant and not realize, which is
also
I think
Adam and Eve, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's like
Hmm.
when it's like when this is a very silly example, but little kids, if they have siblings or something, sometimes the siblings will, if especially they're close in age, they'll wear each other's clothes. And if you're a 4-year-old boy and you randomly threw on your sister's dress or something like that, you're just a 4-year-old and clothes mean nothing to you, really. I mean, half the time little toddlers are running around in their diapers, like it doesn't mean anything to them. But then adults will tell them, like, no, that's not for you. So it's not till you're fed.
Hmm.
That's a very basic example. But the the monster initially just comes in happy, and it's not even necessarily that. I think when he first came in, it was like, now we are going to sleep with each other. I'm not saying like when he first came in to
Yeah, yeah,
talk with
yeah.
Victor Frankenstein that was it. I think it was like this pure, oh, I'm just so happy to like have life and to talk to someone, or at least like there's this just pureness to him
Hmm.
that Victor initially rejects. So when you,
So, no, I'm sorry. You finished your thought.
the idea that he didn't see anything, this love that he had just right away for Victor, I don't think it was this thing he thought he shouldn't have. It was just like I just have a natural uh curiosity or this desire for companionship that was present, and then it was completely stamped out. And then, like you very succinctly put it, then it's like, well, later on the conclusion is, I guess I need a woman because I guess
Yeah,
that's the only kind of companionship I can have. I've watched Mankind and I've seen that apparently this is wrong, but I guess I need a bride then. And which I have to say, when he's going on his long monologue, that was not the conclusion. Like when he's like, so I've realized I need a woman, basically. I know he's looking for another like him,
hmm,
but it is kind of funny that it just like, that's after telling this whole story about this family and learning language and then learning that there's bad in the world, and almost like the you said that Adam, like, oh, now I know sin kind of thing, that then it was like, oh, I guess I need my Eve. So I think there is also this feeling of he didn't know it was a thing that he should be ashamed of and
hmm.
and to see as wrong, until Victor, the creator itself, also basically cursed him for
Yeah.
it. Uh,
So, uh, I mean, I kind of said it already, but just another thing that I don't think I thought of until you've been bringing it up is like the his sin is knowledge, right? I mean, like in a way, because you said shame, which I think is really interesting because, um, when Adam and Eve, eat of the fruit, they become ashamed. They're aware of their nakedness. They become ashamed. He is innocent, right? I mean, like in his just being, he's kind of just derping around. He's like he doesn't even know how to talk, right? I mean, he doesn't know how to talk. He doesn't know how to read. He just vaguely is running around in the mountains for a while, and then he learns about civilization and kind of family in a way. I mean, he learns from it by observing that family. He learns about language through reading, through listening, and it's like once he knows all those things, then it's like, oh, I want this too. This is nice. And then when he doesn't get it, that's when it's like, then I must turn to evil. I mean, it's kind
yeah.
of like this really like, well, if I don't get it, then you don't get it either. And
Well, there's there's
I'll just say one more thing that has nothing to do with what I'm saying. I wrote in my notes the him watching the family, I wrote adorable and kind of creepy. Like
yeah.
I
Yeah.
like when he's like gathering wood for them, and then they're like, oh, there must be some spirit around, like some good spirit. I was like, dude, I would be like, yo, it's weird that there's always enough wood for us. Maybe we should look around, like, is there someone watching, like, what's going on? Um, and like, I was really sad when they rejected him, but at the same time, I was like, what did you think was going to happen?
He
Like,
doesn't
you popped out
know.
of their like hovel, by their house, and you're like, huh?
I know.
I've
He
been
doesn't
watching you for like a year.
understand.
Like it's so creepy. But he doesn't
Well,
know.
Yeah, Victor just left. That's why I'm like, Victor's kind of it's not that he created a monster. It's that through his apathy, through his complete rejection of this thing he created, the abandonment of this thing, it's like
Mhm.
that's what created the monster, not the literal making of this life.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I do want to also add that that wording that gets brought up a lot when he is kind of angrily, shaking his fist at Victor Frankenstein, the monster will say, "You gave me this feeling. Why
Mhm.
would you give me this feeling then?" Which I think can speak to, like you said, the desire for knowledge, the desire for companionship, possibly if there are indeed queer undertones to this, that feeling of
Mm.
like, why would you make me have this attraction or a desire for companionship in a way that you're then going to tell me is wrong. So there's like all these different, like, you gave me this feeling and then you won't allow me to expand on it or even follow through with it whatsoever. Why bother giving it to me in the first place? And that can be extracted and applied to other things besides just those examples. But it is, I mean, that's why I feel like the theme of, God and man feels very present in this, because it's a lot of these questions. I think a lot of people, regardless of their circumstances, people ask these things all the time, like, why do I have to go through this? Why do I have to go through this? um let's see, definitely creepy, but I had some grace for him not
Yeah,
knowing social
exactly.
norms. Oh yeah, I just, there was a, when the old
I
man, the way
the
it
thing
was
is, I
worded.
guess what I should clarify, I wanted them to love him, right? I mean, there was a deep part of me that wanted him to pop out, talk to the old man who's blind. He would introduce them, and they'd have this cute little family, but I knew that was never gonna happen. I
Yeah.
was like, "Please."
Well, they also, it leads you to think that the old man is starting to figure out that he's referring to them. And that's how it feels. The
Yeah,
presentation of like, maybe if you tell me, I can help you out. And
yeah.
like, I don't know if it was the monster's way of viewing it, that he thought, because it's presented like, oh, he knows, he's in on it. We're both speaking the same language here. And then so when he was like, it's you're the family, and the old man's like, what? It's so sad. I was so sad about that part. I just want to say thanks for bringing up all the different topics the book covered. Sorry, I don't have much to say. I finished it right before the stream and still trying to gather my thoughts. Oh, you really jumped in. Just needed to blind everyone on Earth, and he would have had thousands of friends. Oh,
True.
he just needed a friend. That's really, it's like Walton. That's why I come back to Walton being like, I really could use a friend. I would love to find somebody who's like me. And I think if the idea is that possibly Walton created all of this, then there's the idea that the monster is like him also, because he also is just seeking companionship, and it's not easy to find that. I mean, it's actually a very tragic story.
It is,
I
yeah.
think it's interesting because the iconic aspects of this book that are present in a lot of media and Halloween costumes and things
Mhm.
like that lean into horror. But I don't think this is horrifying in the same way that we would think of it. It's almost like it's just so deeply tragic. I think the horrifying part is that people are, we create monsters with how we treat each other. And that's not quite the same level of, oh, jump scare, or I don't think him being hideous was scary or anything. You know what I mean? I never pictured him and thought, oh, this is frightening. There's nothing like that. It was all of the ways that he was treated and that we treat each other. That was, I think, quite sad. Do you want me to read some of your other quotes that you had? Because you had I the right for my own benefit to inflict this curse upon everlasting generations.
I mean, we kind of talked about that already.
That
Um,
quote by itself, just stamp that onto the cars of so many people, and so they have to look at it all the time, because I feel like that's a lot of us. We're like, well, I don't want to think about how this is going to affect later generations. We create monsters with how we treat each other. Oh, thank you. At first I thought you were quoting the book. um let's see. So Sean, you had a couple pages. Maybe this will help. You said
Okay.
page 149 quote, page 119 quote, page 118 quote, if that helps. I'll read some of the other quotes that Sean really liked that he wanted to take note of while he's looking for this one. Alas, Victor, when falsehood can look so like the truth, who can assure themselves of certain happiness? Also, the sight of the awful and majestic in nature. We
Oh
read
yeah,
this one before,
yeah,
but
yeah.
just reading it again, had indeed always the effect of solemnizing my mind and causing me to forget the passing cares of life. Misery has come home, and men appear to me as
That's the
monsters
one.
thirsting for each other's blood. That is one of the best gothic feeling quotes, I think, of the
Yeah,
book. It's so moody and
it's
it's
so
word.
moody. Yeah.
I love the wording of it. I'm going to read it again. Misery has come home, and men appear to me as monsters thirsting for each other's blood. You said threats of hellfire and forced
Oh
confession.
yeah. So the poor young lady who confesses to murdering the child because the creature frames her. I mean, he puts the locket or whatever it is um in her on her person. She just straight up says like, "Yeah, I confess because like I need absolution." Like the priests came and said confess and meet your eternal reward, or don't and meet your other eternal reward. Pick your eternal reward. And you know gotta say, I'm not sure if you can get more anti you know uh a certain type of Christianity than that. I mean, I thought that was very interesting. Like I was like, okay, shots fired here at the at least at this priesthood, at this time, so I thought that was really interesting.
Do you remember which pages, or excuse me, which quotes were associated with these pages that you had?
So
Or was it
page
like the whole page had
no,
those
no, I have page
moments?
118. Was man indeed at once so powerful, so virtuous and magnificent, yet so vicious and base? He appeared at one time a mere scion of the evil principle, and at another as all that can be conceived of noble and godlike. I think that's the creature talking. He's like, you guys can be like so good and pure, but you're also so awful to each other. Um, this was the one from 119. I thought this was interesting too. Still the creature talking. I really liked the creature's monologue. I learned that the possessions most esteemed by your fellow creatures were high and unsullied descent, united with riches. A man might be respected with only one of these advantages. Without either, he was considered, except in very, very rare instances, as a vagabond and a slave, doomed to waste his powers for the profits of the chosen few. I was like, whoa. We
Well, that
talking
ties back.
capitalism, Mr. Monster? Like, what are we
Yeah,
talking about here?
that ties back to because he also pretty quickly is like, oh, yeah, I realize this family is poor, and kind of goes back to what we were talking about, the way we romanticize certain times in life and certain um eras. And right there, it's kind of like acknowledging at the very least money makes a difference. And then do you recall, or did you want to expand on that at all? And then
Oh, I just,
also,
I mean, well, for one thing, I thought like just how language changes. Like, I thought it was interesting descent. Like unsullied descent. I mean, what I think he means is like good lineage, like good ancestry. You're born into like the aristocracy, but I just have never heard it like descent. I was like descent, like that's interesting. But yeah, you have to have either you have to be a part of the noble class or be rich. Preferable to be both. Otherwise, you're working for the profits of the chosen few. I was like, all right. So we
yeah,
figured out some economics here,
I'm
real quick.
surprised modern individuals have not plastered that all
Yeah,
over
it's
merch.
it's like you're a vagabond or a slave doomed to waste his powers for the profits of the chosen few. That's crazy. I was like,
Back
that
to
is
my car stickers. I can see that on somebody's back window.
yeah. I was like, what's going on here? Um, page 149. Also the monster. I love the monster. Shall I respect man when he condemns me? Let him live with me in the interchange of kindness, and instead of injury, I would bestow every benefit upon him with tears of gratitude at his acceptance. But that cannot be. The human senses are insurmountable barriers to our union. yet mine shall not be the submission of abject slavery. I was like, dude, he's so good. Like, I was like, he's like, I'm not taking this. If you can't get over what you see with your eyes, I won't be your slave. I'm like, nice.
Yeah, he has so many quotes that if you are like, I'm gonna ignore the fact that you murdered this innocent man named Henry, and you know, if you ignore him framing the one woman for the little boy's death, you're like, oh, he's like our revolutionary
Yeah.
character. He's actually the hero. And then you're like, oh, I mean, somebody does. But I think the book is very much showing what mankind does to itself, I think, in a lot of ways. We turn inward and we care about all these things that are so stupid, like appearance, like wealth, prestige. I will say, Henry, I kind of just said, like, oh, he's just innocent. But then it throws in there, like, oh, Henry is going to go bring British goodness to the rest of the world or whatever.
Yeah,
You're like,
whoa.
what? All like, I mean, that felt, because that was almost like right shortly before he ends up being killed. It was kind of like, now that Henry is not just observing nature and being like happy, delightful man that he is, and it's like, oh, he's gonna bring this greatness upon these other places. I thought that was kind of interesting that he dies shortly after that, like before he can succumb to the worst parts of mankind. Is there another quote that you found?
Yeah, I finally found, because I wrote, so the monsters thirsting for each other's blood. I was like, why can't I find this? Because I wrote a lot more. So this is,
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it was Elizabeth talking, and I believe it is, and she is talking about the death of Justine, the girl who confesses. I no longer see the world and its works as they appeared to me. Before, I looked upon the accounts of vice and injustice that I read in books or heard from others as tales of ancient days or imaginary evils. At least they were remote and more familiar to reason than to the imagination. But now misery has come home, and men appear to me as monsters thirsting for each other's blood. And I was like, wow, she had to wake up.
Yeah, I was just about to use that word, not to sound like, oh, she's woke now, not like that, but you know, this idea of when your eyes are opened to the way the world really is. I did appreciate that.
And she's also in that same paragraph, the one that says, alas, victor, when falsehood can look so like the truth, who can assure themselves of certain happiness. I was like, man, Elizabeth and the creature, man. I had one more quote. I don't think I included it, but it's like the Debbie Downerist quote, I think, of the whole book. And I think it's Victor at the very end. Death snatches away many blooming children, the only hopes of their doting parents. How many brides and youthful lovers have been one day in the bloom of health and hope? And the next, a prey for worms and the decay of the tomb. Of what materials was I made that I could thus resist so many shocks, which, like the turning of the wheel, continuously renewed the torture? I was like, okay, he's in his feelings.
Well, also it kind of brings back the whole, like, the question of evil.
Yeah.
As well, all these people who did nothing, they're healthy, they're young, and all of a sudden they're food for worms. Yeah.
I was like, oof, okay.
I do want to check this. It says, I know you all have already mentioned it, but how do you feel shame and guilt was handled in the book? And then also Victor initially with Justine allowed shame and guilt over his creation and the consequence to lead him to self-preserve and not speak up about things versus later in the book finding resolve. Yeah, I think that's another reason why I kind of kept wondering, is the monster real and did he kill the boy? Because I kept thinking, like, wouldn't Victor try a little harder to do something here? And so I could be mistaken. I do think part of it felt like maybe some of it, because you do see later, and he even comments, it's kind of what you were just reading, why did I get seen as innocent in this trial, essentially, but then Justine was found guilty. And I don't know if that's commentary on how quick people are to just view women as guilty and case closed, where they want to give benefit of the doubt to men. Because there was, I don't want to say there was a lot more evidence against Victor than Justine, but there was a decent amount. And then also Victor's reaction to finding his friend. And then I know they all couldn't understand him, but one guy could understand him, the doctor, I think, when he kept being like, I murdered him. And he kept saying it like that. And then they're like, no, I think you're innocent. And perhaps that's part of it. I don't know that I think necessarily, though, that that's what the book was saying in regards to the parallels between the two of them. I think it is just the how come sometimes one person can be the victim of something unjust and then someone else isn't. And in his mind, I think your question about shame and guilt, this idea that he had a lot more to feel guilty of, even though he wasn't the person that literally killed Henry, but he played a role in some degree, and he felt bad, but yet he was found innocent. Just this the inherent unfairness of societies. I think was maybe what it was saying as well, and also a little bit that shame and guilt mean nothing. Like outwardly, they
Yeah.
mean something internally, but no matter how guilty you feel or how ashamed you feel, if society deems something as acceptable or innocent, then the internal feeling doesn't matter. Whereas even if you don't feel shame and guilt for something, but society tells you you're supposed to, that actually is what has consequences oftentimes outside of your control. What do you think, Sean?
Does to some extent try to be like, no, the monster did it. And I can't remember if that was with Justine. He tells some sort of judge, that like there's this thing I made, and the guy's like, oh, okay, buddy.
Oh, that's way later.
Is that way later? Okay.
Yeah. Because he tries, because he's like, are you talking about when he tells the guy, you have to help me hunt this thing down?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
okay, like pat you on the
Yeah.
head.
But he does tend toward, I guess what I'm saying, aside from that part, I kind of thought he tended toward isolating himself and like, I'm gonna go off and make another creature, and Henry is like, I'll come with you, I'm going that way. And then he's like, okay. And then but then eventually he's like, no, I need to be by myself. And he kind of seems to withdraw. And I guess going back to absolution, if we take it to be this is an actual event, that he's telling Walton something, this is kind of like a confessional, like this is like, I want to get this off my chest before I die, because he is dying. And so I wonder if there's that part of it. Like, I mean, I think it's obvious he feels deep guilt and shame. And I think it was obvious to the people around him, like, why is Victor acting so weird? He's so like, and I think for a while, like, oh, he's sad about his brother, or he's sad about Justine. But then at some point they're like, hey, can you come back to reality? Like, because his dad even thinks that, like, oh, he must love someone else. He doesn't love Elizabeth, and I don't want to pressure him. And then he's like,
Even
oh,
Elizabeth is like,
yeah.
I just want what makes, and I don't want to interrupt you. Sorry, keep going.
Well, so anyways, I'm just saying, like, he is exhibiting signs of he's not well, but he doesn't really say anything. He has to say it to this essentially a stranger at the end of his life, and I think he maybe presents it as, I want to stop you from making the same mistake. But it might just be like, I just need to unload this shame I've felt for so long. So
I want to add to a couple things to bounce off of what you said.
Mm-hmm.
Since his dad's brought up, the saddest figure for me in the book, he's so nice. The dad is nice, and he seems like he loves his kids. He's so sad about the boy dying. Yeah, and then he's like, oh, Elizabeth and Victor are married, and then she dies, and he just dies of sadness. And Victor, it kind of just happens, but it's like, oh, he held him as he died, and you're just like, okay, this is So that's why when I was saying before, it's less that the book is scary from a visual ideas kind of standpoint. It's more of just it's so sad. So the dad I felt really bad for. And then also the dad lost his wife back in the day. The setup for the dad and the mom's relationship was the dad I think was older than the mom, and then her father died, and then he felt like, oh, I have to take care of her, and then he married her when she was I think of age, which is a little, you're like, okay, so you knew her when she was a kid is kind of the implication. And then she was so grateful that she was just like this doting wife. And it's like, I mean, I know they wouldn't use this term back in the day, but it was almost like grooming a little bit. And him benefiting from the hardships she endured, you could almost say taking advantage and swooping in. And it's one of those things where, you know, you have to step back sometimes with the modern lens thing. And it's like, I don't know if they would have seen the father as this villain because things were different back then, you know, that kind of thing. But in the same way that Elizabeth and Victor are basically siblings, but they're like, we're going to be married someday, kind of
Mhm.
nobody, and they even call each other cousins, that kind
Yeah.
of thing. Anyway, back to a lot of the other things we were talking about. So you were talking about how it's like this deep confessional and stuff. It is really interesting the amount of times that his predicament mirrors Justine, even though she's
Hmm.
only kind of briefly in the book. There was something too, though, with the idea of everybody. It. Sorry to bring up the possible queer undertones again, but everybody being like, if there is another, they don't ever go if there's another woman. They just say if there's another. They keep being like, do you love someone else? I think, right? I don't think they ever mention it being a woman. They just keep asking him if he loves someone else. And they all keep telling him like, we love you, we'll be there for you. And it really feels like they're kind of trying to say, hey, we'll support you. Let's see, I think I saw somewhere that they were actually cousins in the 1818 version, not just adopted, and that was one thing that was changed. Oh, interesting.
Hmm.
Interesting. I think cousin marriage wasn't that big of a deal to people back in the day, so I can understand that. But it is interesting that it was changed. Anyway, it does kind of feel like they keep trying to understand why Victor is so sad, and then even Victor being like, "Hey, Elizabeth, I have this secret," because this is why I wanted to bring it before, Sean, when you were saying that he is treating the thing with Walton as a confessional. With
Mhm.
Elizabeth, he's like, I have a secret, but I can only tell you after we're married
Yeah.
so that we can have complete honesty in our marriage. And I thought that that part was kind of funny because it's like, why wouldn't you tell her before? She's in danger. Your whole family's in danger. Why do you keep not telling people the situation? Like you said, he only really the one time tells the other guy, hey, we need to go after this thing. But otherwise, he pretty much doesn't ever say anything. I kept waiting for him to confess to Henry. I thought he would tell Henry what was going on. But again,
Yeah.
it's like, is it a purposeful, like he loves Henry's company so much and he's afraid he'll lose Henry if he tells him the truth kind of thing.
I did write down also in my notes, and I didn't write it out. I just wrote the passage about his mom dying was beautiful. She died calmly, and her countenance expressed affection even in death. I need not describe the feelings of those whose dearest ties are rent by that most irreparable evil, the void that presents itself to the soul, and the despair that is exhibited on the countenance. It is so long before the mind can persuade itself that she, whom we saw every day, and whose very existence appeared a part of our own, can have departed forever, that the brightness of a beloved eye can have been extinguished, and the sound of a voice so familiar and dear to the ear can be hushed, never more to be heard. These are the reflections of the first days, but when the lapse of time proves the reality of the evil, then the actual bitterness of grief commences. Anyways, actually, I'll keep reading. The whole thing is good. Yet from whom had not that rude hand rent away some dear connection? And why should I describe a sorrow which all have felt and must feel? The time at length arrives when grief is rather an indulgence than a necessity, and the smile that plays upon the lips, although it may be deemed a sacrilege, is not banished. My mother was dead, but we had still duties which we ought to perform. We must continue our course with the rest and learn to think ourselves fortunate whilst one remains whom the spoiler has not seized. I was like, oh, wow. That's a very sad passage.
There's also when he's reflecting on his first memories, and it's his mother's like gentle touch and his
Yeah.
father, something nice about his dad too. It's so nice. It really is like, oh, everything just goes so wrong. One of those feelings that is kind of filling you with dread as you're going along. One thing I'll add too is first off, Sean emphasized the word countenance just now because my friend Christy, the only thing I knew before I started, she was like, "Oh, they use the word countenance basically every other paragraph." And then I couldn't not hear that word constantly. It was constant. So that was a bummer a little bit because then every time it came up, I chuckled a little. I would be curious to find the digital version and type in countenance and see how many times it's in there. I think that would be interesting. But I will say I don't know if this was common in the time, but she did like to kind of tell you things were going to go wrong before they would go wrong.
Mm.
So with Henry as an example, when he's going on and on and on about how amazing his friend Henry is, he ends up saying something like, "Oh, but possibly," he doesn't say this exact wording, but it was almost like, "I'm indulging in my memory of him because of what came after." And
Yeah.
you're like, "So Henry's gonna die, you know,
Yeah.
the monster's gonna kill Henry." So there was a lot of, I'm just gonna tell you something directly, or not quite directly, but I'm going to very strongly, heavily foreshadow something with
And then
certain
you're
characters
just
or
waiting for the inevitable,
yeah.
yeah.
And I don't know if that was a common way to write things back then, or if it was maybe a maybe this was part of the genre, just this constant dread feeling. But I thought it was accomplished pretty well because it did
Yeah.
frequently bring up a curiosity. It definitely took the it didn't make anything a surprise, really. You kind of always knew to expect some of the stuff, but it did you were more curious of how do I get here? And it does it from the very beginning with Victor telling Walton, "Oh, I'm going to tell you this cautionary tale, basically, because everything is going to be miserable and you do not want to pursue what you're pursuing right now." I'll add one more thing in regards to my question earlier of what was Walton pursuing, because we talked about how there was kind of this generic, "Oh, I'm going here to do this." But the fact that Walton he had two things he said that I was kind of like, huh? So one is that when Victor is talking to him, he's like, "You must stop, you must stop, you must, this is a fruitless endeavor you're going upon." And you're like, going to the North Pole? You know, like it didn't feel like he was talking about what Walton was actually doing, which is why I was like, what was Walton doing? And the other thing is Walton had this one part where he said something like, "If all mankind must suffer or pay the price for almost like his pursuit of innovation, then it would be worth it," or something like that. He had this one hard villain line that came out of nowhere that I was like, huh? Our tender-hearted little Walton here who seems like he just wants a friend? Where did this come?
Just
It was
really laying
really,
on thick the, like, maybe pursuit of technology and science at all costs is bad. Like,
yes. Yeah.
oh, how'd you like the writing itself? I thought the writing was at times absolutely beautiful. Like, I thought that passage that I just read, I was like, wow, that's tremendous. Very beautiful writing.
Yeah, it's almost like it's so over flooded with it, you almost don't appreciate it until you pull it out and then you
Mhm.
read it, and especially having a casual conversation together and then you read a passage, you can't help but be like, "Oh, we sound so stupid compared to this." It really highlights it, but when
Yeah.
what I mean is that when it's within the text, there's nothing stupid to juxtapose it against. But then the only thing really is the frequency with which they use the word countenance. That's the only thing that I was like, another word, just a couple of times, use something else, more than a couple, use a different word. But I thought that the writing was fantastic. I really, really liked it. And I am curious because I know a lot of modern conversations about books these days are about how they lay everything on really thick. And I wouldn't say that this book was laying it on really, really overtly all the time, because of course some of what we're discussing is interpretation, and we don't necessarily have the answer of directly this is what the author meant by this, but some of it is not subtle.
Mhm.
So I think it's kind of interesting that we criticize books nowadays sometimes for being overt with their themes. I do make a distinction with being overt versus beating you over the head with it. Like, I'm going to make it over and explain it to you. That's when I think you run into feeling like the author doesn't trust your level of intelligence.
Right.
But overt themes, I don't think are inherently bad, but we do have this tying back to the way we romanticize things in the past. We do have this view that all classics are so much better. And I do think this is better than a lot of other things. I really liked this. But I also think that it wasn't subtle. It did just kind of remove any of the surprises because it foreshadowed things really strongly. So it was like the foreshadowing wasn't subtle. I don't think all the themes were subtle. I think some of them maybe more than others, but I don't think a lot of them were super subtle. And I don't think it was a bad thing. I definitely think the specifics and then some of the, if we're really digging deep or if we're doing the like, did any of this even happen thought, I think obviously that is up for debate. But the fact that you said the full title is the modern Prometheus, is that what it
Mhm.
was?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're like, well, was that her original title or did that get
Yeah.
put in later? Yeah. Okay, so it's like, all right, I mean,
I
you
think
even
it's like
said,
Frankenstein or the modern Prometheus, something like that. Like,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, you even said earlier, you're like, I mean, I saw these references, but that was pretty easy to see given that's in the title. So some of it's right there in front of you. Love the writing personally. Yay. So yeah, Sean, what do you think? If you want to answer your own question.
About the writing?
Yeah, and then also, what do you think of it in compared to modern works? That was one of my only.
Oh yeah. I mean, I have said, I think possibly on some sort of live stream before, I am consistent. I love being beat over the head with things. I do not care. Like I don't care if it's overt. I don't care if it's drilled into me. As long as it's something I find interesting, I will enjoy it. I don't love actually being like, let's peel back the layers of text and subtext to reach the true meaning of this. Like, I don't, that's not something I delight in. So if you can spoon feed me and I'm like, I like what you're spoon feeding me, I'm with you. So I think this one scratched some itches of mine. I mean, I do think like all the kind of theological, philosophical things. I'm like, I enjoyed that. Um, how does it compare to modern novels?
Yeah,
As you
that
put it
question
on the
of
screen.
the way that people kind of view how
Yeah.
themes are very direct and
I mean, I guess that's the thing is like there's I'm trying to think of like some of my favorite books. I think some of my favorite books are kind of direct. Like as much as uh I'm gonna sound really annoying here, but like something like White Noise by Don DeLillo, um, that book I don't think is like I don't think you have to sift through that book. A lot of that book is kind of, you
I
know,
think this book was more straightforward than that one.
yeah, but I mean, even that was kind of just like commentary on modern life, commentary on death, like but I agree. I mean, but like it's I think there are some books that uh maybe go out of their way to challenge you. And this one is not that, but I don't think it's a bad thing. I guess is what I'm saying. It's like I'm
I
pretty okay with,
I
with
do
it.
think that it depends on the execution. It depends, like you said, on what the themes are.
Mm,
I also I think for me, I like when the character work is what's up for debate because human beings naturally are not good at just telling you how they feel, and they often don't even know how they feel. They just react.
hmm
So it makes sense that you would meet characters in that same way in writing. But if you have something to say in your book, I don't think it's a bad thing to just say it or say it in an artsy way or say it in an elegant way. Or even you can kind of say it subtly. But I think that as much as I do like the room for interpretation, sadly, I think sometimes writers almost fall back on I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say. I also don't want to
Yeah.
ruffle any feathers, so I'm going to make it so that anybody can get anything they want out of it.
Can I say a huge generalization?
Yeah.
So I think what works for me about this book and I'm trying to think of something comparable, um, but I'm struggling. It's kind of overtly a moral tale, right? I mean,
Yeah.
like, it's kind of like, "Hey, what are we doing?" Like, I mean, it's kind of like, and I I think sometimes we're this is my huge generalization. I think sometimes modern books are afraid to be moral tales. I think they don't take a strong position. In fact, sometimes I think there's almost like this air of moral tales are out of fashion or they're simplistic, which they can be, right? I mean, they can be simplistic,
Yeah, I
but
think there's
but
this
almost
idea that
like
they're
this,
childlike.
yeah, yeah, childlike, or you're kind of like there's not a complexity to them. And I think this book goes to show that that's not necessarily true. I mean, I think that there can be a very overt moral, and yet still we've been talking about it for an hour and a half, and I'm sure that there's so much more. I mean, it's a book that like people have written about for 200 years. So I
Yeah.
think like there's something to it.
Well, we've also both, at this point, read some Abercrombie, which is grimdark, and I
Yeah.
think grimdark. I don't want to speak too broadly because I haven't. I'm not super well versed with a lot of grimdark, but I do think sometimes certain subgenres they are purposefully not trying to say anything that is defined by a certain moral. They're
Mhm.
more just like, this is how the world is.
Yeah.
This is the reality. There's not a hero necessarily. There's not a direct antagonist. Everyone's kind of awful. And they just kind of lay it out there for you to, I think, be able to. Well, there's different reasons for it. It can be entertaining, of course. But I think sometimes when you're able to see something in fiction, you then are able to then more accurately see the reality for what it is in real life. But I think also sometimes these fairy tale retellings, to your point about sometimes there's this, oh, it's beneath real literature and
Mhm.
things like that. And these kind of fairy tale retellings, I don't think I've had this mini gripe with how we talk about fairy tale retellings for a while, which is that yes, I think certain mythology retellings and fairy tale retellings were starting to become so popular. It felt like we were doing the same one over and over and over again. It'd be like the way that we have, a remake of a superhero film every few years. It'd be like if you had four of them in the same year for the same
Yeah.
story. You'd be like, this is a little much. So I understand the criticism that they're maybe overused at times they become a trend instead of like, oh, this story really feels like it's saying something. But I do think they are looked at people kind of look down at them sometimes. But I don't think people necessarily look down on Frankenstein because it has the it's a classic label
Yeah.
and because the writing is very different from writing these days. And so it just kind of naturally feels more sophisticated and beautiful. But I don't think most people look at Frankenstein and feel like it's something to look down upon when in reality it is its own kind of retelling. It's
Mhm.
like, or at least it's loosely inspired by, maybe not so
Right.
loosely inspired by some of the other things. I mean, she directly references Paradise Lost and seems to have themes within it that are parallels to that, like the modern Prometheus thing. There are things in there that it's like she's very much pulling from this. And I do think that there's value in stories that do this. It's just sometimes in modern day, we have a tendency to look at modern works as like these are less than. And in 20 years, or maybe not 20, but in 50 years, I wonder if books that we look down on now are going to be seen as fantastic works just because of the natural tying this all back together, looking back and being like things were better before, this inherent desire to romanticize things from the past. But I do think that the idea of you being able to say something powerful that speaks to this time but uses frameworks from the past, I think that is a parallel between now and this work. And I do think, like you said, it just kind of goes to show you can use various different forms of genre or frameworks to tell a compelling story. Both of us really liked it. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah, I thought it was
is the
really great.
summary. And it will be interesting because I think both of us are looking to read more classics, and we have already moved on to reading another classic, and already it's interesting to see the similarities and the differences. and it also is just interesting to see. I think we have this view that people were so different back in the day.
Yeah, and then you're like, oh, they weren't that different.
Yeah, they weren't that different. Human beings kind of have been pretty similar for a lot of
Yeah,
existence. It's more of the society and the social norms that have changed, but I think people are pretty similar across the board because I read this and I did not think it felt like it was from so long ago.
no.
And I think that's kind of what you said at the beginning too.
Well, and I think too, like it's almost like I'm probably just repeating myself at this point, but it feels sort of quaint to have this reaction to, like I said, maybe a textile mill or something, you know. And I know I'm being a little facetious, but like it does feel so much more disturbing, you know, post, you know, I brought up Oppenheimer, but you know, post like we have crazy weapons, you know, and we have, you know, like the AI thing is kind of a different discussion, but I mean, I guess we could include that. But like technology, like if the moral tale was like, hey, watch out for technology and what it's doing to you or what it could do to you, we didn't really take it to heart. It's only ramped
And
up.
I think
So
it pretty directly in the book, Victor early on was like, oh, a lot of science is focused on these tiny things. I want to do something great. I want to do
yeah,
something nobody's ever seen the likes of before, which is why I think your comparison to Oppenheimer is a really good one because I think
yeah,
it's very fitting to to use the phrase I used before, the hubris of mankind a little bit. This was lots of fun. Thank you, husband, for
of course.
reading this book. And we will be reading others, moving on to Wuthering Heights, not because of the film that's coming out, but we just have been reading that one. So it'll be a fun one to probably do a discussion about as well. But anyway, for anybody that ends up watching this, thanks for watching. If you also read the book as part of the patron read along, thanks for joining in the reading of this. It was lots of fun. And we'll chat with you later. Bye.